key components that a book series must have. A much stronger, tougher looking Tahiri Veila.
And I think it's very fitting now after everything she's gone through. Why do you have a giant cutout over your chest?
Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. Meg and I are here continuing our epic journey, discussing the new Jedi Order books. This podcast for everyone. If you're a newcomer to Star Wars, you want to learn about the books, this is the great beginning point. For those of you who are veterans and have dedicated a lot of time reading New Jedi Order, I think this will be a pretty interesting discussion for you guys as well. In a nutshell, what is New Jedi Order? It was a publishing campaign that lasted for 19 books and was published from 1999 all the way to 2003, featuring adult novels describing 20-odd years after events of the original movies, where Luke Skywalker is restoring the Jedi Order, and there's an intergalactic invasion from Yuuzhan Vong. Meg, how are you? It's great to have you back. I know we're approaching the conclusion of this epic journey. How have you been? What's new with you?
I'm good. I'm still doing, my play is ongoing. We're in the home stretch though. We only have about a week left.
Nice.
And I just read Allegiance by Timothy Zahn, which I had not read since it came out in, I think, 2006, 2007. So that was very interesting to read again and find like how much I remembered, how much I did not.
I wish I remembered too, but guys, I'm not going to lie. It's actually one of the Legends books, which is on my to-read list. Because I read so much in between, I kind of like set it aside. And since then, but hopefully I will circle back to it. Let's quickly remind everyone where we left off, and we'll continue our current book. We basically closed off a trilogy called The Force Heretic by Sean Williams and Shane Dix. And what we've learned in our previous podcast, Jaina Solo helped Tahiri Veila overcome her inner battle. And she's now, a new identity has emerged, which combines all the strength of the Yuuzhan Vong and humans. And actually turned out quite well for her. Luke Skywalker and his Jedi team finally discovered this sought-after planet Xenoma-Sukkot. And it actually decides to listen to Luke's suggestion and help fight off the invaders. On the other side, our lovely infiltrator Nom Anor, his plans are thwarted yet again. And he seeks new, inventive ways to overthrow the Supreme Overlord, Shimbra. Meg, I wanted to throw a couple of very general questions out there because, it was very, very interesting to compare our notes on this saga so far. Mm-hmm. What is your overall impression of the Heretic trilogy, the last one that we finished off discussing, as a whole?
I feel like as a whole, I saw it as like some strengths and a number of minuses. And I think the biggest minus for me is just the length, and maybe it didn't need to be 3 books. I feel like that was just my biggest takeaway from the Force Heretic trilogy, where I was like, really loved Nom Anor's plotline, thought that what happened with Tahiri was very interesting, but oh boy, did this feel dragged out.
It's a criticism that I hear quite often, specifically in regards to that trilogy, because, working at my comic bookstore / video game store back in the day, which I managed. It was up in the Bronx on Broadway. It was called Bulletproof Comics. And, when you have thousands of fans coming through your shop, picking up their weekly comics, they obviously are very happy to supply their thoughts and impressions on Star Wars, which I was picking everybody's brain. Like, hey, what do you think about this book? What about that title? And there was a general consensus that a lot of people felt it was a little bit overstretched.
Yeah.
I can't exactly pinpoint my every thought and feeling on the book clearly because I've read it so long ago, but for some reason, I didn't mind. I find myself, as I look back on it, I think I'm more lenient than a lot of fans. Like, I would see some shortcomings, but as long as they're not glaring and really, really irritate me, I'm willing to forgive a lot of things. So I don't know if it's a good trait or not. But now, shifting from just the Force Heretic trilogy, you and I were now 17 books into it at this point. But when you're reading it, did you ever feel that the new Jedi Order begin to overstay its welcome?
No, I feel like the only points where that happened for me was maybe the Force Heretic trilogy. And I think it was just that me bouncing really hard off of the stylistic choices that the authors made of like, I'm not going to do chapters. And that was sort of me being like, okay, we're like 4 years into this war at this point, and I don't like how this book is set up. But I feel like it never really lost me. And definitely the last two books in the New Jedi Order series, I felt like really drew me back in. I can sort of see why Force Heretic is a little different, because after having basically running the gambit of star by star through Traitor, where you're like, like it is nice for it to be slightly lower stakes. Mm-hmm. So like a change of pace. Maybe Force Heretic started to lose me a little, but didn't completely lose me, since I was willing to move on to the next ones.
Yeah, I think what New Jedi Order executed quite well, it never had a low quantity of really like exciting thrills. I mean, it was like shooting from the hip all the time. Yeah. Bang, here, this happens, that character goes off, here's a little twist over here. But I think for me personally, what I appreciated about it, it was that the heroes constantly made dents in their journey throughout the narrative, and you sort of intuitively began to feel like, okay, now we are ramping up and we're going to read our crescendo, and that's probably maybe within the next 3 books it's going to be all over. I think if nothing else, the authors were kind of oversaw this arc overall from start to finish, where we're going to start, where we're going to end, and we constantly need to inform the audience. Like, we're not going to keep you for 100 books. Who has the time and money to invest, like practically speaking, right? So we can continuously need to communicate that we know our own story and we know what we're doing with you. I mean, even when you watch some of the greatest show like Battlestar Galactica or Breaking Bad, you know, each show, no matter how well it's written, it definitely has its low-key points where like, I'm a little bit bored here. Like, give me something else here. Come on, like, we don't need 15 seasons. Look at, you know, Walking Dead, how that fared. You know, you need to let us know when is the conclusion. No matter how bittersweet experience that is, you don't want to party with your favorite heroes, but it's got to end somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And the last general question I had are, what do you think are some key components that a book series must have in order to reach the mass appeal?
I think you got to have characters you care about who change over the course of the books. And I think that's part of what New Jedi Order does so well, is that in the beginning, I was like, Jason is so annoying. But then by the time you get to the end, you're like, Jason has come so far. So it's like, it's got to be characters I care about who evolve and develop. There's got to be like bad guys where I'm legitimately concerned for people, because you're like, oh wow, this is like a threat. But I think this is what they also do well, is like they're not too much, because sometimes you're like, I don't know how you can handle this without having some sort of Deus Ex Machina ending to it. And I like when we see how they develop strategies and how they're going to overcome these bad guys. And I think too, just like world building where you have this like really clear sense of where you are and what it's like. And especially when it's like different than what we're used to, I'm like, yeah, give me some more of that.
Yeah, and the Yuuzhan Vong culture and their technology and their terraforming techniques that they, you know, weaponry they exploit in this galaxy is quite interesting and very otherworldly. And I think the book covers and the artwork also helped convey that from the marketing standpoint. You understood that I am still in the Star Wars galaxy. This is familiar yet different. And actually, that's going to be our next point, guys. Now, we're now moving into discussing the actual book number 18, called The Final Prophecy. It was done by Greg Keyes and released in September in 2003. Before we jump in this story, Meg and I, we usually enjoy talking some of the more memorable book cover artwork that we like. And, you know, this particular one is done by Therese Nielsen, and she's known for quite a few Star Wars books. She also has done The Edge of Victory 1 and 2, which are some of my favorite American covers. Whether it's Yoshi Nagano's Japanese counterparts are infinitely better. We'll leave it up to your judgment, guys. Go Google them, check them out. Another tremendous, brilliant artist. But in this book, Therese, she portrays a much stronger, tougher-looking Tahiri Veila.
Yeah.
Do you feel that it was well done? Do you like this tougher looking female lead?
I like it because when we saw Tahiri on the cover of the first Edge of Victory book, she's definitely looks like, you know, a cute young teen. And I think it's very fitting now after everything she's gone through that it's like, she's like, nope, I can handle this now.
Yeah. I think it's interesting and it's nice to show physicality because, you know, since the ancient Spartan days, right, where women clearly didn't serve in the military, but they participated in athletic events, they were trained professionally to be like physically fit and strong. And when you look at classical Greek period, oftentimes women, particularly goddesses, who are not necessarily entirely martial, some of them are, but some of them were not, but are still portrayed in these idealized forms. And it's another topic that I wanted to touch in regards to Tahiri, this book cover, and Star Wars conversation in general, which I try to now, you know, engage my ex-Twitter audience and ask these questions, which I hope they are not necessarily triggering, but they are stimulating in a way that fosters conversation. And I don't want to shy away from topics. I don't want to feel like I'm stepping, you know, on somebody's toes. But at the same time, hey, this is the question I want to ask. I don't care how many views it gets. I don't care how many millions of fans see. That's what I'm curious about. And I want to ask fans. I'm not going to be shy about asking it. But I want to be diplomatic enough and open-minded enough to say that I respect all sides of the question. So what I wanted to ask for you next is, do you think that tastefully done sex appeal is important to popular media?
I think it depends because I mean, definitely there is the almost like subgenre of the comic book girls where you look at them and you're like, okay, you're a superhero, but why do you have a giant cutout over your chest on your outfit? And like, I think some of it is like done really well and done tastefully. And I feel like male fans, female fans could be like, hey, that character looks great. I love that. And then sometimes where you see it, I feel like Mara Jade especially falls prey to this with the leather cat suit, where I sometimes see art of her in the leather cat suit. And I'm like, those proportions are not possible in a human.
Yeah, it's obviously exaggerated.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things I found interesting in rereading Allegiance was that it almost seemed like in the book, Timothy Zahn was trying to give an in-universe reason for why Mara Jade might have worn like a leather bodysuit. So yeah, I guess I think for me, it really comes down to like the portrayal and like, I think sometimes like sex appeal in characters is what makes people look at them and like first pay attention to them and then realize like, oh, there's more to this character than this. But when it's taken like way too far into the beefcake realm, then I'm like, you've lost me.
Yeah, it could be a distraction or an asset. Depends on how you do it. And I think that one of the reasons I want to ask that, fans, is that I feel that conversation has been pulling to either side, and it's not good for the fandom. It's not good for the franchise at all. You know, at one point, yes, maybe overly sexualizing and hyper fixating on just your outer appearance. It's kind of shallow. But on the other hand, there's modern marketing trends in some franchises, including Star Wars, where you show these very deliberately unattractive females, like, look, she's just a casual. What's wrong with the character looking appealing and attractive? Like, how does that undermine anyone's self-image? We're not gonna all look like, Angelina Jolie's and Brad Pitt's, but you gotta be comfortable in your own skin. It's like, oh, I look attractive enough, or I need to work on myself. Maybe I'm, a little bit overweight, which shouldn't be a taboo to say. And, I'm a work of progress. I'm doing something for myself. I enjoy these videos that you see on social media of people are just working hard, no matter how they look or where they come from. And yet they're putting effort into their appearance and they're striving for an ideal. I think there's some merit in there. But now moving away just from imagery in terms of pictures and into the imagery in terms of narrative portrayals, did you ever feel that the women were underrepresented or objectified in the expanded universe books?
Well, I definitely felt like in the earlier books, it was sort of like we'd have the big characters. We'd have Leia, we'd have Mon Mothma, but it was sort of, I definitely noticed rereading the books, I'd be like, hey, there's like no other women in this book. And I remember people getting upset about it, like, oh, but the characters that are there are very developed. I'm like, yeah, but if you read a book and there's just like 4 women in the whole book, but you've got like 100 nameless guys, you sort of wonder like, but there should be like 50-50 here. And I think that's definitely something that, like, as the books progressed, the authors got better at, like, including more women characters. Like, that's something that I think Zahn maybe struggled with a little in the original, like, the Thrawn trilogy, where, yeah, you got great characters. You've got Winter, you've got Mara Jade, but then you're like, there's a lot of guys here. And, like, as he wrote more books, I started to be like, oh, there's more women in these. Like, this feels a little more equal, which as a woman reader, I appreciate because, yeah, I mean, you read Star Wars and there's aliens with tentacles coming out of their face, but you also sort of like want to see yourself in the story as well.
That's where you relate to the most.
Yeah.
Meg, I really appreciate you expressing these things, and hopefully, our audience is watching. They'll be able to listen here to alternate perspectives and maybe supply their own opinions in the comment section below. But I want to sort of push back a little bit on this idea, and I invite your challenge. Maybe if you feel that I'm, overstepping boundaries here, by all means. Obviously, I don't know everything. I'm not a journalist. I didn't document the way the expanded universe was developing. But just from general kind of trends that remembering myself, growing up in America as a teenager, I would suspect that a lot of the things that we saw in the expanded universe, what made it what it was driven not by toxicity or male domination or patriarchy, all these like terms that fly around today, but demographics. Not to exclude our lovely Star Wars female fans from the conversation, but I honestly had a feeling that majority of fans were guys. And again, it's not to say that Star Wars is not for women. It's not to say that we don't welcome it. We love that stuff. What guy is not happy about his, better half or a female friend? It's like, hey, you want to kick it back and watch some Star Wars? Like, hell yeah. Right? That's always exciting. But I think that's what George Lucas's frame of mind was. That's what the expanded universe was. That's where majority of male authors came from. And partially, for better or for worse, that's what it was. And I just feel sometimes it's wrong to approach it from the angles that, you see, they did it wrong. They weren't conscious or open-minded. No, that's what it was. It's a product of its day. It doesn't necessarily need fixing. Now, on your end, what you're saying is you feel happy about the fact that we have more female characters now. And I think that's great. That's only strengthens the franchise. But we shouldn't look back and shun like whatever it was before and say, they did it all wrong back in the day. Well, now we are more enlightened than ever before,
Yeah, I don't think they did it wrong. I just think it's interesting, especially to reread it and being like, you sort of see how it evolved over time, that I think male Star Wars fans have always been more vocal, because I know that, like, female Star Trek fans were basically the push behind fan fiction. Like they started zines and stuff like that. And there were like women groups, Star Wars fan groups in the 90s. There was the Star Ladies who like Zahn calls out and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I think that they've always been like less vocal about their opinions about Star Wars than a lot of the guys have been, especially when I think back to the prequels days, where, the people that did not like the prequels were very loud about it.
I was one
I
of
feel
them.
like a lot of them were guys.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember myself in like late teens, early 20s, all those AOL chat groups and fan forums and sites like, oh my God, did you see that special effect? Who is Jar Jar? Like we went at it. I think it plays into our like, and guys are, are like the more aggressive nature. If it's fair to say women are generally more agreeable, it's like, well, I like it. And even when you express your strong opinion or displeasure, it's like, this is how I feel. Bad luck if you don't agree with me. That's it. That's where it ends. You'll still maintain your stance, but guys are more like, no, I'm going to prove to you. We're going to go at like mental war battlefield. It's going to be Battle of Scarif Part 4. Like, I'm going to prove I'm wrong. Anyway, guys, it was quite fun. I really enjoyed, like, you're informing me. I didn't know about all these female fandoms back in the day that Timothy Zahn was calling out. So I'm informed now. I keep an open mind. Like, it's interesting. I think important to challenge each other's ideas and come to a consensus, to a common point. Anyway, let's dive into the story now. What is happening in our book? Back to Yuuzhan Tar, right, the terraformed and renamed Coruscant. Nom Anor is losing a grip on his Jedi heresy cult because he didn't deliver Shimra's downfall, which everybody was counting on. It's like, hey, where are the results? He learns that the Supreme Leader's greatest fear, and he conceives this new, well-layered prophecy. He heralds the coming of, this great planet that will appear over the skies of Coruscant, and it will spell the doom of his people, the Yuuzhan Vong. He learns that Master Shaper Yin Yum, you and I, why we talked about her, her examination with the biological ship that was brought back from this Sikot, and he's still pretending to be a Yusha false prophet. And he kind of learns of her little experiments. She's checking out this ship that is half biological, half technological. And he strikes a deal with her and Tahiri Veila. And he wants to go and learn about the nature of this planet. And maybe they will help end this war somehow. Now, the first question I have is, talk about the portrayal of the Jedi heresy cult. How is this portrayed, and was it believable to you?
I think it was, because we've seen how the shamed ones are so denigrated by the other Yuuzhan Vong that, like, it makes sense to me that if they saw some way of rising out of their station, of like actually achieving equality with the rest of the Yuuzhan Vong, they would seize that. And the fact that I don't think the Yuuzhan Vong have really noticed that they are outnumbered by the shamed ones. Like, there are more shamed ones than warriors or priests or shapers or anything. And they're just counting on them, obeying their orders and doing what they have to say. I think it's very interesting how that, like, Jedi heresy started with Anakin and Tahiri on Yavin 4, and then has, like, progressed to this point where it's this, like, distinct religion within the shamed ones. Of course, that Nom Anor is using for his own ends, but I could see how it would start and how it would build so much, because this is really like a lot of things is the Yuuzhan Vong's downfall, like their bad strategy. But I think the way they've treated the shamed ones is one of the biggest elements of what will cause them to fail.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I think it's very recognizable the way that these lowest ranking citizens or sub Yuuzhan Vong are being treated, and how to respond to this conflict. Because I'm thinking of a beautiful scene from the renowned animated film, Akira, where they show when everything unravels towards the end and how people start creating these cults and posters and running on the streets, this is our punishment. And people go into this complete mental chaos. And it just shows the shamed ones' desperation and how they begin to rely on mysticism and intuition rather than see reason. And you can't fault them for them. From a certain point of view, I was feeling bad for him too. I said, this is what have devolved into, because it appears, but when they first arrive into this galaxy, they're highly sophisticated and well-structured society. And all the parts of it were working like one well-oiled machine. That's how they were able to traverse into the next galaxy and accomplish so much victory over a very short span of time. But now things are slowly coming apart. And partially is, they have an expression is, you're only as strong as your weakest link in the chain. And they're your weakest link in the chain. They're the people you're supposed to take care, look after, because they're the ones that lift you up. And they didn't take care of them. I was like, oh my God. So it was quite relatable. But why Nom Anor's newfound infatuation with Zenoma Secor? What do you think was going on there?
I don't know. Well, I think he obviously knows that like Shimra is really focused on it. And so it's like, and I think there is a part of Nom Anor that is still like, how can I get back in Shimra's good graces? Like you're scheming to bring this guy down, but there's a part of you that's still like, but maybe I could get back on his good side. And so I think learning that Shimra is so focused on it, and then Nom Anor in turn is like, okay, this has to be really important. I'm going to focus a lot of time on this.
I'm going to bring another if element into it. What if the entire story revolving this mysterious planet was part of a divine providence? And do you think maybe for a shred of a second, there's this inner believer in him because he's a product of this culture saying, but what if the prophecy is true? Or maybe he was started believing his own hype. He's like, you know what? What if there is some kind of spiritual or unseen power orchestrating everything, and I'm just this dummy who is not seeing it just yet? But if I can capitalize on this, do you think there's anything like that going on there? Or maybe the authors were trying to add that subtext?
I think there could be a bit of that in there because obviously with the Yuuzhan Vong, the whole reason they left their galaxy to begin with, well, besides the fact that they trashed it, was that their homeworld was like this sentient planet. And so I think just hearing or even a rumor that like, oh, there's one in this galaxy, any Yuuzhan Vong, regardless of whether they still believe in their religion and mythology or not, would be like, oh, okay. Yeah, I want to check this out.
Yeah, and perhaps, grand salvation or the master plan revealed to them and everything is restored back in order. Again, it's so fascinating how he could make connections to our real world. We're living in the technologically advanced age where we think we know everything there is to know about life, where our ancestors had to rely on their imagination a lot. And, if there's a scare, there's a fear, like the Aztec priest would say, here is the twilight. And, we're going to command the sun to reappear via this ritual and restore peace and normalcy to the world. It's very fascinating, very interesting. I think somewhere deep within us, we still carry that torch, that primeval belief in things with a higher power, so to speak.
Yeah.
Moving on with the story, Tahiri Veila accepts the offer. She decides to bring Corran Horn along. And they reach the planet aboard the ship that Nin was studying. Upon landing, the party begins to examine the planet, and the Vong formally renounce their violent past. Tahiri and Nin realize her alter ego memories came from this priestess. Talk about the priestess just a tiny bit. Is she this mad scientist? What compelled her to experiment with Tahiri?
Well, I think it's interesting because when like Nenyum and her mistress took Tahiri in the Edge of Victory books, it was almost like the Jedi were the only threat that the Yuuzhan Vong could see to
Mhm.
their reign of terror. And so it was like, well, if we could take a Jedi and make her into a Vong, then like we could defeat the Jedi. So I think there was initially that certain sense of like, oh, this is we don't understand this enemy, but if we make them like us, then we will. But I
If you
think
don't,
the more that Nen
I
Yim
will look
has
for you.
realized, like,
I will find you.
that the Yuuzhan Vong superiors are lying, that, that eighth cortex didn't exist, that the knowledge that the gods gave them is gone and like they're on their own. I think the more she started to understandably question like everything she'd believed and done.
Mhm.
So I think it's very interesting, like her connecting with Tahiri and then the two of them realizing that like Tahiri's Yuuzhan Vong memories are Nen Yim's, that like they have this connection in the end. And it's almost like they've both been separately going on these paths of like
Yeah.
understanding, like Tahiri to unite her two selves, Nen Yim to figure out like, what the future holds for the Yuuzhan Vong. And I don't think it excuses what Nen Yim did at all, but it definitely makes her an interesting character, that she's one of the few Yuuzhan Vong who like actually has any sense of like self-reflection.
Yeah. She was, and you have sympathy for her, especially at the end.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by her character, her growth, her relationship with Tahiri. And if in the beginning, my feeling or interpretation of her was that she's acting out of self-interest, not
Yeah.
because she's a great believer. Yes, she worshipped and feared the gods. That's without question. But she was this mad scientist. Let me take a look at this less than Vong, this subhuman creature, and experiment on it and see what's going on. By the end, she saw the fortitude and strength of character and spirituality behind her.
Yeah.
And she said, hold on a second. She became a lot more, like you said, self-reflective and selfless. Like, what are we doing here? Is that what
Yeah.
Vong are all about? Like tormenting this woman? And because of the things that happened between them, I think they only grew together. And it's not entirely wrong to even call them friends.
Yeah. Yeah, by the end.
Mm-hmm. What does the priestess class and its behind the scene dealings say about the Vong culture in general, you think?
I think that the Vong culture, you're first introduced to it by like the warriors. So you think, oh, that's it's just martial. But then like the more you learn that like, yeah, the warriors go out and do things, but the shapers are creating everything they use, and the priests are guiding where they go and what they do. It definitely makes their culture more complex than you originally think it is, and then definitely adds more of that, yeah, like that sense of mysticism to it, where it's like they're not just orcs
Yeah.
who are just attacking for the sake of attacking. Like they're doing it for a reason, but that reason is like initially very alien to us, the reader.
Yeah. And if, like you said in the beginning, I think, was a conscious choice to present this very linear, surface level view of Zavong to give you a certain idea what they are, and then dig deeper as series continues. And specifically with characters like Nin Yum, you see that what outwardly appears to be like almost like a communist like society. There is no I in us, like we're going to accomplish everything together. You see that prevailing individuality, and a person like Nin Yum could have wisdom to see where they were and now where they need to go to survive. She becomes truly selfless at the end of it. It's like, what do we need to do? What do we need to learn about ourselves, about this planet, and about where we belong in this new galaxy, and how we can build a home together with humans?
Yeah.
Again, it asks, on this, when somebody's not a Star Wars fan, they check this book. Okay, it's a tie-in media, it's just whatever. These books, science fiction, space fantasy, whatever. But honestly, like, it presents such profound questions. And I think that's the spice in any science fiction when you're able to reflect back to real world and say, oh my God, even though I read 2 hours of the Star Wars book or whatever hours it took to finish it, I'm learning something about the real world, the real human psyche at the same time. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's keep going here. So Nien Yum learns the true nature of Zenoma Sekot, the living planet. What is its exact nature? Maybe you will remind me later on. Actually, my memory here is a little foggy. But oh no, Nom Anor is plotting again to get into Supreme Overlord's graces. He aims to destroy the planet. He kills the priestess. He descends into the planet's depth to sabotage its hyperdrive capabilities. And before she dies, Nien Yum lives long enough to expose his plan to Tahiri and dies in her arms. Did you at any point believe that Nom Anor would keep his word?
I mean, I feel like I hoped he would, because you always hope that like he's turned a new leaf. He's gonna, but then he's such a weasel that I mean, I shouldn't have been shocked by him killing Nen Yim, but honestly, I was, because I was like, oh no, because you're like, she's so important. She's so pivotal for the, and then yeah, he killed her, and then you're like, you little rat. You haven't changed at all.
It's like Daenerys from Game of Thrones. Have you finished that series?
Mm-hmm.
It's like towards the end when the last season went like completely 180 from what fans expected. And so many of my friends were physically sick with her. I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe. And I was like, hold on a second. Didn't you see the previous episode? The telltale signs of it. This chick is off the rails, man. Like, she's about to pop off. She got dragons who breathe fire. Like, are you serious? What do you think was going to happen? Were they going to, like, slit her friend's throat and this and that? That's the outcome. That's when people are obsessed with power. Yeah. Especially when, you know, in her early childhood, when she's being used and sold as this bargaining chip to all these men who abuse her. What do you think was going to come off of it? And you can argue for and against the last season that didn't left a lot of plot holes. It didn't finish a lot of loose story threads and a lot of characters were abandoned. Yes, all of that. But at one point where I felt they got it right, all the tail signs, all the little moments that led up to Daenerys' complete going crazy, it was foreseeable. And same here with what's happening in this story. It's kind of, you could saw it from, not from a while away, but you kind of had an inkling to it. But what makes a Nom Anor, I know I ask it almost every podcast, but I think you and I both love him. What makes Nom Anor such an interesting character?
I think because he is such a weasel. Like, he's so smart. He's so smart. And then he makes such bad decisions, but you like understand why he makes them at the same time. You're like yelling at him the whole time he does it. You're like, you are better than this. But it's like he can see where the Yuuzhan Vong go wrong, but he never like truly breaks out of that. He's still like stuck in the system. A victim of his environment and his own plotting and machinations. I always felt it's fascinating to follow such characters that you love to hate when the reader is empowered by knowing the information that the character doesn't. And especially when the author starts foreshadowing that the reckoning is coming for them. Because, ooh, that's so satisfying. Like, oh boy, you're gonna get it. Or, you know, you're gonna pay for all your sins. And this is very gratifying and uplifting thing that not that necessarily that you want to kill this guy or personally choke him, like express violence towards him, but you know that they're just the rewards are coming. Yeah. You're like, ooh, you're gonna get it.
Like it gives a story next to oof, like, and you feel like, again, you feel empowered. It's like, oh my God, I know something that you just wait. You thought you were smart. You thought that all your plans will come to, you know, execute perfectly, but no. Was saying goodbye to Nien Yum tough?
Yeah, I feel like for someone who we wouldn't see her for like multiple books, I really liked her character. Like, she was so interesting. And I think too, her like she's come to this realization about Zonama Seacoat, and it's clearly a very important realization. And then to have her be killed before she can relate this, you're like devastating, devastating. Like, not just to lose this like
Yeah.
really intriguing character who has had such a transformation over the books, but then to lose her right when she's made like the revelation of all revelations. You're like, no.
Quick reminder, Meg, what exactly was the revelation? I honestly don't remember.
So I don't know if we find it out in this book, but we do find it out in the next book. Basically, at this point in time, she's like, wow, there's so many similarities
Mm-hmm.
between our technology and Zonama Sea Code. And so she's like, I wonder if our original homeworld and Zonama Sea Code are related. And you're like, they are. They are.
Okay, okay. Now the memories are flood again. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I get it. Thank you. You're like my anchor in these podcasts. You honestly, you're bringing me back because I play off of your ideas. That's why, like, I like asking questions, and when you answer them, so much stuff is coming back to me.
Yeah.
How I felt about story beats, the little elements here, or what happened over there. It's just exciting. It's like I can't wait to reread this stuff. But do you feel like what do you think it's okay for supporting character to like to end their story?
I feel like I'm okay with it if, like, number one, it fits, and number two, I can see how it's going to progress the story further.
Mm,
And, like, I think as much as I love Nen Yim and I'm like, no, I wish she could have made it until the end. Like, I think her figuring out, like, Zonama Coat's origins
mhm,
is really like the pinnacle of what her character could have accomplished. So like as much as it hurts for her to die in this one, I'm like at least she died like not really for a reason because I mean that's still Nom Anor, that rat. But it's like I felt like her character arc was completed from like, just being like a shaper like any other to then being like, oh no, but things are so different than I knew to now like she's the one that discovered this, even though she won't be able to lead people going forward. Like at least she found this out. I feel like that felt
mhm.
that's what makes a supporting character's death satisfying to me is like their death needs to have purpose. And I could still not like it, but like it needs to have purpose.
Yeah. I think the way that a supporting character leaves a footprint, like in your
Mhm.
memory and on the story, is twofold. I think it's very important in no like small terms to first you have to announce what does this character desire, what do they want, what is their sort of contribution to the story is. A reader
Mhm.
needs to understand it. Like this character's jumping. Like earlier, you and I we talked about the superficial things and aspects that we don't like about any franchise, and you shouldn't have like this just hot male or female figure just stroll into the story and say, "Look at my blonde wavy hair," and just bounce in the next thing. I hate when they do that, and it's
Yeah.
in any subject matter, whether it's your gender identity, sexuality, whether you look like. So now my problem is not with those subject matters you're trying to introduce that I personally don't espouse. The problem is when you bring it in the story and it doesn't affect it in any meaningful way,
Yeah.
right? So what the supporting character needs to accomplish, they come into this story and the author has to completely own what they stand for. If you want to represent a certain movement, a certain ethnicity, a certain spiritual aspect, whatever your subject matter is, show it to us.
Mhm.
And like you said, by the end of that character's arc, they need to fulfill that requirement. If they don't, and you sort of like just rickroll us and you throw that character under the bus, like happens a lot in Game of Thrones, like my boy Viper. Holy,
Yeah.
uh, Meg, me and my brother, we were screaming. I never reacted this way to any media before. I mean, when crack when the whole skull thing happened, I couldn't believe it. Like, why are you doing this? Why is this shock value, grotesque fatality? Like, what's going on there? Like, it possibly was more to his stories. Like, say her name. You killed my wife. You raped her. I'm like, I want to know what's going on there. Keep going. Past this battle, please. Maybe 5 more episodes. I would appreciate it. And it's gone. So yeah, that's on the supporting characters. Approaching the closure of the story. Nom Anor escapes Tahiri and Corran Horn. And he challenges and defeats Harar, who is presumed dead. As the planet is dying, a Yuuzhan Vong escort fleet, secretly contacted by the spy, comes to pick him up and deliver him to Shimra, hoping that he will be welcomed back into society. The Jedi friends are rescued by Luke and his team, and they learn that the planet managed to rid itself of Nom Anor's sabotage and shoots into hyperspace. Its final destination is Yuuzhan Tar. Once again, hearkening to the big question, is it destiny or is this something that the Jedi were able to affect and it's because of Luke and Jacen Solo's influence on the planet? Do you think that the planet's fate would ultimately decide the outcome of this war?
I think so. I mean, from the first time we heard about it, you're like, oh, this place is unique. And then, when you have 3 books of Luke and co searching for Zonamasi and then a whole book where they're just trying to convince like the planet's consciousness to side with them, you're like, this is gonna be pivotal. Yeah, so like when Nom Anor's like, oh, I've sabotaged the planet, it's dying. I'm like, I think you spoke too soon, buddy. Like this is gonna be the tipping point.
Yeah, I think it would have been a little bit too pulpy, maybe too cheesy for me, too fantasy-esque if it was the only weapon that the Jedi held.
Yeah.
If there was a last hope, like, oh, we can't, everything that we've did for 20,000 years of studying the Force and all the fleets we were able to gather and Wedge and Telos in our military command as, Akbar, and now have to resort to this, it would have been a little bit too much. But the way that they played it, what I personally like it when you leave some of the parts of the story vague and you don't spell it out for us. My thought was like, it could have gone either or. We don't know if the Jedi would be able to find another solution or if the planet is basically saying, boys and girls, I got this, but I'm not just going to hype myself too much and tell you how much I affected the story here. You have to guess in a way. And that's what makes the planet interesting. That's what keeps it out of the realm of total, like, pulpy early 30s cheese, where everybody was a doctor or a scientist with a puffed up chest.
I think, too, the new Jedi Order series has made it very clear to us that, like, the Galactic Alliance and the Jedi, they are winning now. Like, their strategies are working. Yuuzhan Vong are falling apart. And so I think that if they hadn't, if Zonamasi that hadn't fallen through, they still would have won the war. But I think, like, having this living planet gives them this advantage over the Yuuzhan Vong. And then, too, it sort of opens up the possibility of, like, maybe we don't have to wipe them all out. Like, maybe, especially because we have this living planet now on our side, we can come to some sort of agreement that maybe won't relate, end up in, like, the entire genocide of the Yuuzhan Vong race, which, I could sort of see the galaxy leaning towards, and I don't blame them after everything they went through.
Yeah, I mean, wars is in the title, right? Yeah. And if all you're doing, you have these space wizards with lightsabers running around, then what else is there? It's always has been a greater part of Star Wars seeing like war theaters. I was recently talking about the ending climatic battle scene of the Return of the Jedi. I mean, how fascinating is that? You see individual single pilot ships duking it out as the Lando Calrissian is trying to divert the fleet, and Akbar is projecting authority from his point while Luke is trying to accomplish his things on the Death Star and Han Solo and Endor Moon. That's also equally interesting because I think today's audience, at least some of us, until Mandalorian came out, was like, come on, every story has to have Jedi. Can we have something different? And I think Mandalorian supplied that element, and Andor also did it. Like that, you don't always need the Jedi. Yes, they're central to the story, and the Force obviously is as well. But sometimes you want to move away from it and give it a little bit of break. There is an ongoing subtext that suggests there is more going on beneath the surface level of events in the New Jedi Order. Is Xenoma Secord a representation of the will of the Force in your mind?
I think so. I mean, because we will learn in the next book, like, why, basically the reason why you cannot sense the Yuuzhan Vong in the Force. And I feel like that has to be such like a wound in the Force. Like if you have this entire race of beings who are completely outside of the Force, like our voids cannot be sensed. I feel like, the Force isn't a person. The Force is beyond our understanding, but I have to believe that the galaxy, the vibes are not right now, and like the Force would be like, I gotta fix this. And having a living planet show up, you're like, oh, this does feel like divine intervention.
Back when in the early 90s, when Timothy Zahn's original Throne trilogy introduced the Yasalamer lizards, which pushed back the Force, and he was basically using them as a shield. I was learning from the fans back in the day, in like late 90s, early 2000s, that it didn't sit well with some of the fans. They didn't like this very literal explanation of what the Force is, because it basically dismantles the whole fantasy of it. And in this series, the New Jedi Order, they also show you things. I mean, the Jason's Force Walk, right? Or does the Force Walk begin to happen in the Legacy series? I forgot.
I think that's Legacy,
or
right? Maybe Dark Nest too.
Right. So Jason's Force Walk, which comes into play later on, but also here as well, like different abilities with the Force. I always trained my mind to interpret them as not redefining what Force is from the writer's perspective, but kind of showing us what we didn't know before as readers. Because when you start explaining too much and like putting and compartmentalizing and putting to a shelf, so the Force can do this and cannot do that. It has a wound. It won't be able to read these aliens. That kind of turns me off a little bit. So when Yuuzhan Vong were involved, it's like, wait, the Jedi can't sense them? I was okay with the Yasalamer. But when the Yuuzhan Vong were started doing it, in order for me not to have a very cynical outlook on the story and like start down, boo, that's not what I like, I told myself, well, hold on, Ben. Maybe there's just something about the Force we don't know yet. And that's the beauty of it. Once again, when you keep our focus over here, there is the great Force and it affects all living things. That's it. That's all you got to know. Jump into it with us. Trust us that we'll be able to tell you a good story. And that's the same thing with Yuuzhan Vong. Like by the end of the New Jedi Order, how you slowly start seeing that they're also children of the Force in a way. It's almost like comparing the three great religions we have here on Earth, right? They are all basically communicating the same message, just in a different language and a slightly different interpretation. Another question I had for you is, the Jedi couldn't sense the Vong in the Force. And again, reiterating this point that I just made earlier, could it be that the intergalactic aliens have their own alternative counterpart to the Jedi experience with the spiritual?
Yeah, I sort of wondered something like that at first, because it was like when we're introduced in Vector Prime, and that's the big thing, like, oh my gosh, I can't sense them in the Force. I can't use the Force. I can't Force push them. And I was like, well, if they're really from another galaxy, like, why would another galaxy be set up exactly like the galaxy far, far away? Like, maybe things work differently there. Like, and then I feel like the explanation we eventually got is more that like because the Yuuzhan Vong were cut off from the Force, they developed their religion and their like whole mythological structure as a result to like make sense of the world around them. But I have to admit that when we first introduced to them, I was like, oh, well, maybe they have like stuff that just we don't know about because they're from somewhere else.
So in other words, to add to that question, is the Force something that is an omnipresent concept, or is it something that belongs to this galaxy or to this universe and not necessarily to another, and they might have an alternative?
Yeah. I'd sort of wonder something like that. Like maybe even just like the way that the Star Wars galaxy is articulated, it like they call it the Force. And maybe every galaxy has it, but they don't, recognize it in the same way. And I mean, obviously, other science fiction does not have people with Jedi powers running around.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, it could be an omnipresent thing. It's just like different places perceive it differently. And again, like the Jedi are so small. Like the galaxy is so large, and the number of Jedi, even at the height of their power, was like a minuscule fraction of that.
Yeah, I mean, even in the context of the expanded universe, right? Luke and the other Jedi post the Galactic Civil War, when the Empire falls, they encounter so many different spiritual groups with their own. One of them, I forgot who they are. They call it the Song, right? Or am I confusing things? Before the canon started kicking in, and some of the Jedi are interpreting the Force as the Song. I believe also in the expanded universe, like before during New Jedi Order, there's different like groups and religious groups that Luke goes. I think also in the beginning of the Fate of the Jedi, where Luke travels, right? They encounter different tribes. It's like, oh, is this thing that you speak of that you call the Force? Those sort of ideas I'm talking about. But yeah, I don't like the concept of the Force being something different, like a different form of energy that is unique for Yuuzhan Vong, but also for the Jedi. It's an entirely different thing, because I'm remembering this show. Have you seen The Westworld?
With the robots, yeah.
Did you like it? Like, were you a fan of it?
I thought it was very interesting. I only saw the first 2 seasons. I didn't see the third, which looked interesting, but I didn't see that one.
I felt it was a fantastically written, immensely thought-provoking show. It was really good, but I felt that one of the reasons it got canceled, not because for lack of any quality, it became overly complex. I don't like that. I don't think it serves the story in any way where like, but here's 15 more plot twists and concepts that had come in season 25 off the top with this left character and you figure it all out because I think you're smart. It's okay to treat audience as we are intelligent, but there's only so much that a story formula needs in order to be effective.
Like I think too of Lost started out so good, and then by the time you get to like the last few seasons, and it's like it got too complicated and they're adding too much in there, and you're like, what the heck is this now?
I was showing it to my parents. My mom and dad were hooked, and you got to understand, my mom, she's not a sci-fi fan one bit. She will not watch it, period. And after I showed them the first couple episodes, they were like, hey, Denis, is there another episode in Russian? Can we? They're like pestering me about it. But at the end of it, they also got bored of it. But Meg, at the end, I also want to sort of push up what we're talking about right here over complexity. I'm always get confronted with these feelings that I have of the prequel trilogy. I always talk about how I thought that the way that the relationship we have with art and the 80s kids, how they interacted with the original trilogy, regardless of what George Lucas intended and had written, as a blueprint, whatever you throw on the screen is whatever we get. For me, for over 15 years, that's all we had. That's what we go by. And those memories and imagination and fantasy is very important. It's integral to enjoying it. And when we're introduced with the prequel, specifically, my two biggest gripes are the Emperor turning into this dashing counselor or chancellor that, becomes the villain, which I always thought he was hundreds of years old, and it was the dark side of the Force that turned him this twisted, not, like Force lighting that scarred his face. And when it comes to Darth Vader, I was so much more threatened by him, but all we had to go by is this mask. And only at the end, this grotesque face is being revealed, that unmasking the villain, both of them, it was sort of detrimental to the Star Wars in general. What did you think on it?
Yeah, it's like, I think part of the problems with the prequels is we had, you're right, like 15 years to come up with our own ideas of like what the Clone Wars were, how Anakin Skywalker fell and became Darth Vader, like the origins of the Emperor. And I think it's really hard for a movie to measure up to what you've come up with on your own. And I think that was a lot of it for me, where there were things like, especially Phantom Menace. I have so much nostalgia around the Phantom Menace, just waiting for it to come out. And there are parts where to this day I'm like, wow, look at that scene. But then there are parts where I'm like, that wasn't what my mental image was. And like, no movie is ever going to measure up to my mental image. And so I think, yeah, I agree. Like Darth Vader is so scary, so threatening. And I feel like learning his backstory made him less so. Same with the Emperor. I don't know. The whole time I was expecting there to be some twist with Palpatine that,
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, Sidious and Palpatine are not the same person and something like that. And then how it played out in reality, I'm like, oh, but my brain canon was better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, you can't fault. I completely see the position of a younger generation who grew up with prequels, and that's all they knew for a while.
Yeah.
That's their mental image. That's where, for me, this arguing over personal interpretations and opinions, it's pointless. It's
Yeah.
completely meaningless. You can talk about the merits of effective storytelling and which plot point is loose here or what could have amplified and made a character better over there. But saying this is not real Star Wars because that's not what I remember, it's stupid. I don't like doing that.
That's just completely subjective.
Yeah, exactly. That's completely subjective. And that's why you have to appreciate. And I personally enjoyed the fact that it spawned a whole generation of fans who were like Star Wars Theory, right? The biggest Star Wars YouTuber out there. I mean, the passion and love that he talks about George Lucas and prequels and Anakin. I see he, like, even as most, fans are, he sees all the good in Anakin in himself as well. That's beautiful. That's great.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't have to be part of that. I don't have to enjoy it in order to recognize it in others.
Yeah, it's like my sister, who my first experience with Star Wars was the original trilogies, and then I started reading the adult novels. Her first experience with Star Wars was The Phantom Menace, and she immediately jumped into the Jedi Apprentice books and then the Jedi Quest. She has all of them, like Last of the Jedi, and like that's her era. That's what she loves. She loves Padme. When they came out with the Padme 3 books, like within the past few years, she was so excited because like that was her entry point. And so that's in her head what Star Wars is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's always fascinating, like, to compare notes and see what these meanings, what Star Wars means to fans. Okay, Meg. Final thoughts on the books. We're gonna wrap it up here, guys. Our next podcast, we're gonna finish off New Jedi Order, and hopefully gonna be moving on to our next project. What do you think about this? Did you like it, dislike it? Where does this book sit on your tier of New Jedi Order books?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I read it the first time, I don't know if the final prophecy really like stood out to me. I was like, oh, I enjoyed that. And then I kept going. But when I reread them a few years ago, I was like, Final Prophecy's like in my top 5. I think it was it's another book by Greg Keyes, who wrote the Edge Victory duology, which I really enjoyed. I feel like what he did and what he does with the Yuuzhan Vong characters is like so interesting. I love the pairing of Tahiri and Corrin. Like, why didn't more people do that? It's great because she's like rushing into things, and Corrin, the one who used to always rush into things, is then having to be like, hey, wait, kid. Stop it, hold it. Such a nice dynamic. I really enjoyed it. I think it did a lot. Again, with the Yuuzhan Vong, which by this point in the series I found fascinating. So yeah, it's like top 5 for me, which I did not expect at the time, but I'm happy to put it up there.
That's awesome. That's really cool to hear. For me, it was great because it pulled off the whole idea of a prophecy in a completely different manner that it did with prequels and Anakin's prophecy, which I did not like personally. That's not my big thing. Here, because it kept things more vague, I didn't quite know what the prophecy is. And is it the prophecy that will bring the final end of the Yuuzhan Vong that made it a lot more layered for me? It's something that is just spoke to me better than the prequel films did. Anyway, Meg, as always, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I'm very excited for us to finish New Jedi Order. Guys, for those of you who are checking out this podcast, if you already don't know who Meg is, please check out her channel. All the relevant links will be in the video description below. We'll see you guys later. Take care, everyone.